there's a price you pay for being peripatetic, believe me. The stay-at-homes who get up each morning, and it's like every other morning, who cross the threshold into a world that looks to them like every other day before and the day before that. Well, they hear about people like me, merchants and traders, and they think of nothing but the romance of moving from place to place, governed by nothing but the need to chase the denarii, buy and sell, and trade one's way around the enormous and almost continuous coastline which is at the heart of what became the Roman Empire. If only that were always true. Undoubtedly, it is true some of the time, maybe even most of the time. But they aren't thinking of the days which begin before dawn, because you need to catch the wind that'll get you well on your way to the next port before sundown. They aren't considering the times when you have to take your turn at the oars, along with everyone but the steersman, to make sure you get clear of a headland before you get driven onto the rocks. And they certainly aren't romanticising the times when you get part of a cargo lost overboard in a sudden storm, and it's just enough of a loss to make sure that this is a trip that'll barely cover its costs. Then there's the Romans. They haven't really got a clue about the Romans, nor about quite how overwhelming the Romans are. I believe they truly are unstoppable. There's literally nowhere on this wide earth which will be outside their reach by the time they've finished. You know what they call the great inland sea we trade on, don't you? Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum. I ask you, our sea. Our sea. Like they invented it themselves. As if they invented the shield wall. Except they didn't, that was the Greeks. And the ballistae. They didn't do that either, that was the Egyptians. They didn't even invent their own gods. They just nicked them from the Greeks and renamed them. And there were even a couple of them they couldn't be bothered to rename. They didn't actually invent paved roads either, no matter what they say, because I have seen paved roads in Persia, which were there long before Alexander of Macedon, let alone the coarse and barely civilised Romans. But they are such frighteningly quick learners and adapters, and they're so focused on what they want, and they always want it now. They are brutal and terrifying. I don't think anyone back home has got the first idea how destructive the Romans would be if we ever even thought about throwing off the occupiers. We wouldn't stand a chance, you know. Oh, I hear the tavern talk, and the desperate plans and the bravado every time I come home with a cargo. But that's all it is, tavern talk. Snow in summer, spindrift blowing on the shore of the sea, their sea. That's why I found Jesus so attractive. Because he got it. He knew, deep in his soul, that the Roman would never be defeated by pure strength, brute strength, or guile, or by any of the other plots and campaigns our people mounted in the hills and the wilderness. So instead, he aimed to defeat all that heaving mess of human hatred and failure and resentment, not with more but cleverer hatred, but with pure love. It was as if he was speaking to us from a future none of us had ever envisioned. Downtrodden as most of us were, or shaped by our creeping accommodation and acceptance of the brutal presence, as I had been, we were softened and almost hypnotised by the subtlety of his presence. Our cynical souls, a well-travelled soul in my case, we were reshaped, remoulded by the fullness of his words. One by one, he opened our eyes to what we called the way. He spoke of a coming kingdom, unlike any other in history, any history any of us had ever been taught anyway. He taught, and he lived, and he healed the marginalised, as if the future he laid out had already happened. Because it seemed to us that the kingdom he preached was already present when he preached it. It was as if he spoke that kingdom, and he spoke it into existence in each moment. I found myself listening to him preach and listening to him teach when I was home, so much that I found myself thinking of Judea and returning to Judea, far more than was probably healthy for my business at that stage. I've travelled beyond what the Romans call the Pillars of Hercules and up alongside the coast of Iberia and America to the offshore islands they call Britannia. I've been there to trade metal. The Western Britons, from whom you can buy gold, have a word for an unfocused longing for the place you feel you need to be, to which you're most drawn. They call it Hyreth. Well, that's what I felt for Judea. When I knew Jesus was preaching there and teaching there, it was where I needed to be. It was where I felt anchored. So, I bought a tomb. Right in the heart of the Promised Land, in Jerusalem. I know, it sounds stupid. I bought my own grave. I had the cave in the hillside in the garden, properly structured and adapted, and a stone carved at its entrance, and a catafalque built inside for my body. And I've engaged a gardener to tend the site until it was time that I was gathered into the arms of God and laid inside it. And it made me stupidly happy to think I would be anchored forever in the land that God gave to my ancestors, while Jesus went about creating the kingdom, one healed leper at a time, one freed slave at a time, until the kingdom he had already been part of reached far enough back from the future to raise the dead of today. And then they killed him. Just yesterday, they killed him. In the most horrible way that you can imagine. A method which you can guarantee the Romans didn't invent, though of course they perfected it. They took the promise of the future and they tried to hate him enough to snuff out the love that he bore for them. They failed, of course, to snuff out the love as they would an oil lamp, as somehow we always knew they would. But in the course of their failure, they shattered our hope, if not our love. So I knew what I had to do. I had to make sure that Jesus too was anchored in the heart of the land where he was loved as well as hated. So I went to Pilate, the governor, and I greased my way into his presence in the traditional way. Pilate pretended to a haughty nobility, but none of his officials were averse to the dropped denarii or two. And I bought him off with the promise of gold from the Far East. And I got permission for us to take Jesus' body before they cut it down and threw it into a pit. And I laid his body in my tomb, which had been so carefully prepared and kept ready for me. And there he lies, as he has lain since yesterday, unprepared for burial and loosely wrapped against this cold Sabbath. Tomorrow the women'll go and will wash him and anoint his body with the funeral spices, the frankincense and myrrh, and they'll lovingly wrap him and lay him out once more, wrapping him in all our lost hopes. And all our haunted dreams will be his shroud. And now my only hope is that my body may be laid there in its turn, in some future which should not have come to pass, and laid upon the remains of those hopes, and wrapped forever in the love that should have been enough. A love so powerful that if it survives its originator, then one day, perhaps, Rome will claim to have invented that too. But that's tomorrow. Tonight there's nothing left but prayer and love. There will always be love.